He's getting pushed around in the waves. He's getting bullied by life's circumstances. Life is just pushing him around, but he wants to maintain control.
This is a Truth Transforms Truth Nugget, a daily dose of truth for your daily transformation.
But we ought to be praying for wisdom, so let's not forget to pray for God's wisdom through those situations. So this passage should be a reminder for all of us that we can and should ask God for wisdom often. Well, as we continue in verse 6, we see that not only do we need to ask God for wisdom, but we need to ask God in faith. Look at verse 6. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. So we ought to ask in faith. We ought to ask God and actually believe that God is going to grant us wisdom. I believe what he's actually said here, that he is generous and that he will give wisdom. This means that we're not to doubt. We're not to doubt God. We're not to doubt that God is not able to or not going to give us wisdom. And, Jesus talked about faith an awful lot. Jesus talked about faith with his disciples. In Mark 11:22-24, he was teaching about it, and he said this. He said, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. And therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Now, it is a sad thing in this day and age that when you quote a verse like that, you feel like you have to qualify it. Because this has been abused and twisted in such a great way. This doesn't mean that we can pray for whatever we want and get whatever we want if we just believe. If we just have enough faith, just pray for it and you'll receive it. We know, obviously, from the entirety of Scripture, we need to pray things according to God's will. And the faith is God. Notice he starts, have faith in God. But in context here, talking about wisdom, that is something that we are promised that God will provide. So that is the beautiful thing about it, is we can pray for wisdom knowing that God will give us wisdom, because it is according to his will for us to give us wisdom, because the wisdom is used to live the Christian life. And we're told not to doubt. It would seem pretty obvious that you shouldn't doubt if he's talking about asking in faith. That would seem pretty obvious, but James does seem to want to point out that we really must trust God. We really must believe God. And so he takes a moment to describe the doubter. And so it reads in verse 6, let him ask in faith with no doubting. And then he continues and he describes the doubter. He says, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. And so he illustrates, and if we're doubting God, we're like this doubter on the wave of the sea, getting tossed around. This man has no control over what's going on in his life, but he wants that control. He's getting pushed around in the waves. He's getting bullied by life's circumstances. Life is just pushing him around, but he wants to maintain control. He knows that God has control over everything, but he doesn't want to admit that, and he doesn't want to let go of his own control. He's saying this is what the doubter is like. And he's saying if we walk our Christian life in a way that we doubt God and we don't believe God for his many promises and for who he is, we're just like this doubter on the sea and flopped all around. So we need to believe God, and we need to ask God in faith for wisdom.